The Secrets of Star Trek is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek episode 51.
Captain to bridge.
Spock here.
Make it so. Surrender is not an option.
Attention crew of the Enterprise, this is James Kirk.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
We would have helped you get home if you had asked. That's who Starfleet is.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And joining me today on the panel are Father Corey Stika. Hi, Father Corey.
How's it going, Dom?
Very well. And Jimmy Aiken. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Folks, I want to remind you to subscribe to the show in iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, your favorite podcast app, or on YouTube, where you should hit the bell to get notifications, just so you make sure you get every episode as it's available. And then you can carry it around with you on your phone and listen to it wherever it's convenient. And by subscribing, you help us show that the show is popular and it gets up in the rankings and more people can find it. So we really do appreciate that. I also want to mention another show on the StarQuest network called Secrets of Technology. If you're a Star Trek fan, you're probably into gadgets and technology. And so I want to recommend that you check that out. It's at sqpn.com/technology. And it's a weekly show where we discuss the technology news of the day from a particularly Catholic point of view. And we feel like it's got some really interesting topics, and we've been covering. And Father Corey is on it on occasion, and we've had a lot of fun producing it. So I encourage you to go check that out. So today, though, we're talking about Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, a movie that came out in 1982, 3 years after the Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and a lot of people consider this the best Trek movie of all of them, which we're up to 12, 13 of them now. Why do you guys think that is? Why is this the best Trek movie? Which is, I know we're kind of jumping to the end, but
I don't know that it is the best Trek movie. I'd say it's one of the best.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But I think it's one of the best because of the even odd principle. All of the odd numbered Star Trek movies are inferior. Then they look at the results of that and say, how can we do better? And then they do better for the even numbered ones. And then they get complacent and then they do worse again. And it just oscillates back and forth.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting theory. I mean, it's kind of,
I guess I would argue that this is probably one of the more tightly written of the movies. They didn't try to go as grandiose as they did with Motion Picture, as they do with some of the other ones. I'm looking at you, J.J. Abrams. But it's it's very tightly written. It's very close. I mean, I could have imagined this as like a two-parter season ender episode.
Mm-hmm. Are the J.J. Abrams movies even actually Star Trek movies?
Well, that's a whole nother story. That's a whole other argument for another day.
That is a debate for a future episode, which we could go into. I sort of throw this out there. We'll tease this out as we go through about the popularity of this movie. For a lot of people, this is the most popular. This is their favorite of the Star Trek movies, and I think it comes down. The villain is good. Like you said, Father Corey, it's a tight story. It's not all over the place. We don't have the big long stretches like we did in the motion picture, where they seemed to be fascinated by the special effects that they could do now. The characters, in some ways, the characters go through some of the same development, but the development is better in this than in motion picture.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that even the actors had severe criticisms of the first movie. It's like, where are the character dynamics between all of us? I mean, this was a character-based show.
Right.
And all of that is back now. We have the established character dynamics. This is a character-driven story, not a special effect-driven story, and that's what makes it better.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, one of the things I like to talk about is just how this came to be. After the motion picture, in 1979, it didn't do as well as they'd hoped. And
no, it did make money. It made $139 million, but it cost $46 million, which was just a crazy huge sum at the time.
Right.
I know. Given today's budgets, it's kind of funny to think about. Yeah. I mean, so one of the reasons that the Paramount said, well, it's Gene Roddenberry's fault. He had so many rewrites on the first one that it made the movie less. And so they pretty much took him out of any control. He was given a title of executive consultant, but he really didn't have any role in making this movie.
He could give comments, but they didn't have to take his comments.
Apparently, his first proposed storyline for this was the Enterprise crew going back in time to make sure the Klingons didn't stop the JFK assassination, which
is really not what you want for a major motion picture, because it's like we're ensuring the Kennedy assassination happens.
Right.
That's a kind of downer ending.
And I can see why he's going for it, because City on the Edge of Forever was a very popular episode where Kirk had to make a tough choice about allowing a bad thing to happen so the timeline continues. But you've done that show already.
Well, and they'd also done the Star Trek the Motion Picture before. It was called The Changeling.
Right.
But there's a difference. Edith Keeler is not John F. Kennedy. I knew John F. Kennedy, and Edith Keeler, you are no John F. Kennedy. Also, there's a love story there. What makes City on the Edge of Forever so poignant is Kirk has fallen in love with this woman, and he has to let her die. And that's not there with the Kennedy assassination, unless they're radically reconfiguring John F. Kennedy's love life.
Yeah.
I would like to see, was it Spock on a sniper rifle in somewhere around, actually it would be Spock on the grassy knoll. That's what it would be. Spock with the umbrella shooting the bullet, the magic bullet. That's how it would be. So Oliver Stone does Star Trek. So that idea was rejected. So they brought in Harve Bennett as the producer.
And they came to him and said, do you think you could make a movie for less than $46 million? And he was a TV producer. He'd been one of the producers on the original series. So of course I can do a movie for a lot less than $46 million.
And in fact, the budget originally was $11 million for a space movie, which, that's, and one of the ways they did it was they reused some footage from the motion picture and some other things like that. So he's the one who originally came up with the idea to bring back Khan, to have Kirk and have his son that he didn't know about, to bring in the ideas of dealing with aging and getting older. Those were there from the beginning for Bennett, and then the idea developed from there, and very quickly the Genesis project was added in, and then Captain Tyrrell and Chekhov, they were there in the early parts of the story development. So that they was there from the beginning. And
the aging thing was a way of acknowledging what they were trying to deny in the motion picture, this is just 2 years later after the series, and everybody's still the same age they were 10 years ago.
Right. And so it was, and then there was some conflict over, okay, should we be developing a TV series instead of a movie? They kind of started having this back and forth at one point. And that's, I think, probably where the development of Next Generation probably was, the first ideas for that was around this time. And so you had this conflict here because this idea, is Star Trek a TV property or is it a movie property? And we really had this dichotomy beginning here.
Also, you have Gene Roddenberry, creating, well, if I can't control the movies, I'll create a TV show I can control.
Exactly, right. And so then they bring in Nicholas Myers as the director, who does a great job, I think.
He's also the writer, and he did a lot of the script, and he's a really good writer.
Yes, and he's not at this point a Star Trek fan. He barely knew Star Trek at this point, and ended up watching a handful of things to kind of get an idea of it, but latched onto this idea of Star Trek being Horatio Hornblower in space, the C.S. Forester novels about the Age of Sail and the British sea captain Horatio Hornblower. And you really see that throughout this story. This movie is really a sea battle between two ships of the line chasing each other, including chasing each other into the fog, or in this case, the Mutara Nebula. And if you want to see an example of this, if you actually watch the movie Master and Commander, which is based on another series of books, which is actually, I think, superior to Horatio Hornblower, the Aubrey Maturin series by Patrick O'Brien, you will see a similar scene of ships chasing each other in the fog, which I just thought was pretty masterful.
Only what they do here for the first time in Star Trek history is they give us a 3D space battle.
Yes.
Right.
Up to this point, it's always been a 2D ocean surface space battle with no ocean surface. And now we finally get the ships moving in 3 dimensions and taking advantage of that fact as they're sneaking up on each other in the Mutara Nebula.
Right. And then there are aspects of this you don't want to spend too much time thinking about. The fact that they don't have sensors. Well, if you're flying around in space, space is vast, the idea that they would kind of run into each other over and over again as they fly through the nebula, that's kind of ridiculous. I mean, there are aspects of it that don't bear looking at too closely, but the story is superior enough that it works without if you just kind of suspend your disbelief.
Another aspect of this that was kind of, while we're talking about the behind-the-scenes stuff, is there was a big question of Leonard Nimoy's involvement. Because initially it had been hard to get him to do the motion picture, and he was not in the original scripts for the motion picture or Star Trek Phase 2 that the motion picture was based on. But then he came back and he did it, and he enjoyed it enough that by the end of Star Trek 1, he thought, maybe I could do this again. And so they brought him back, but he had a demand to die. He did he did a Han Solo on them. He demanded that his character be written out. And then he had second thoughts again. And so this filming experience was so much better than the one he'd had on the motion picture, that it's like, okay, if this is how it's going to be, I could do this again, but I want something I want to direct. And so so they start at the end of this one heavily hinting this is not over. Spock is not he's not 100% dead. He's only mostly dead.
Yeah. Well, I'd also,
what do you have to look
something
for?
I read years ago, and I wasn't able to find anything to confirm this, but that fans were so upset by the death as well that they went back and reshot it in. And that would also probably go along with Leonard Nimoy saying after the movie was done and shot and they'd finished off Spock and said, wait a second, maybe I want to do this again. Well, between Leonard Nimoy saying that and then fans in the early screening saying, how could you kill this beloved character? We talked about how beloved Spock was when we were talking about Discovery. How could you kill this beloved character? Where they then went back in and did the whole remember scene with the Doctor.
Right.
That's an insert, as is the shot of his coffin on the Genesis planet. They went back in and recreated that after primary filming was done.
Yeah, it's right. We'll talk about that as we get to it. Like my reactions at the time as a young man watching that in the theater, how I felt about that. But yeah, he clearly was this dichotomy of I want to kill off Spock, but then I don't want to. Yeah. And so there are major themes in this movie related to death and life and getting old and no-win situations and vengeance. We have lots of Moby Dick references in this. We have lots of references to Lucifer from
Paradise Lost.
Thank you. Sorry, that just escaped me for a second. And so we have a lot of this literary connection. I think that's part of it. There's these grand themes, these literary connections that makes the movie seem very
more emotionally powerful,
epic and emotionally powerful, and a bit of intellectual, with those references. So,
well, half of Khan's references are references from literary, whether Shakespeare or Paradise Lost or any of that.
Yep.
And we saw that shelf of books in the Botany Bay that he had obviously been reading for the last 15 years.
Right. So all of his quotes are from those books that the only ones to be able to read.
By the way, so if you know the plot of Moby Dick, what it is it's a tale of obsession. Captain Ahab has this obsession with finding and killing. He's a whaler. He has this obsession with finding and killing Moby Dick, who is this white whale. And he's so bent on getting Moby Dick and avenging himself on Moby Dick that he destroys himself and his crew, except for one guy who survives, Ishmael.
Right.
And there's this moment, so someone has to survive to tell the story. So plot reasons. But there's this moment in Moby Dick where, like, at the end where he's found Moby Dick and they're fighting Moby Dick, Ahab is like strapped to the body of Moby Dick, and as he's diving, Ahab's arm raises, and it's like he's beckoning his men to follow him into death, and which they then do. And so in this movie, Khan is obsessed with revenging himself on James Kirk, which makes William Shatner a white whale.
You can make references to his appearance and make references to his appearance in recent years where he's gained a lot of weight. But anyways,
yes. So let's talk about the difference between Khan in his original appearance in Space Seed, the original series episode, and Khan of the movie. I mean, Ricardo Montalban, let's just say Ricardo Montalban was the best. I mean, he's just what a great actor. I mean, I love his style as a leading man.
And contrary to rumor, he is not wearing a plastic chest in this movie. That is his real chest. He was that buff.
Yeah.
And he was coming off of a long run as Mr. Rourke on Fantasy Island, which is a very different character. Yeah. And he was apparently very concerned that he not be doing that role again.
Yeah,
Mr.
Rourke is this very wise, affable, friendly guy, and and Khan is not.
And one of the things that the Montalban wanted to really have come across is that Khan does not see himself as a villain. He is a hero doing what he does for righteous reasons. And I think that kind of comes across, that Khan sees himself as the hero, he's arrogant, he's condescending, there's a way overblown sense of himself, he's obsessive, but he's getting justice for Marla MacGyver's, his wife, the crewman who went traitor against the Enterprise in Space Seed, and for his people who have followed him into exile. He's getting justice for them after being done wrong in this case. And frankly, he has a case. Nobody came to check on them. They got stranded on this planet, and nobody came back to make sure that they were okay.
Yeah, there is that. I don't fully, and I know villains don't see villains when they look in the mirror. But I don't buy his rationale for this. I mean, when Joaquin, his kind of second in command, comes to him and at one point in the movie and says, "Look, we've got the Reliant. We have a spaceship. We can go anywhere in the galaxy.
Right.
Why do you want to mess with Kirk?" And his answer is, "He tasks me. He tasks me, and I will have my revenge on him."
To be fair, he's been trapped on this very harsh world for 15 years and went through everything with the change of the planet, supposedly getting blown into another orbit and all that. It might have corrupted his mind just a little bit.
Maybe he has one of those slugs wrapped around his cerebral cortex.
Could be.
Right. So as the movie opens...
By the way, I've got to tell a story about those slugs. Okay. By the way, as our cerebral cortex are way too big for one of those things to wrap itself around. So that's one thing you don't really want to think too much about. Right. But we have that, horrific scene where they're putting them in their ears, and it's really effective. It's like, this is horrifying. This is really good body horror. And then we have Chekhov and Tyrell doing this kind of affable zombie thing where they're kind of on Khan's side and they're pointing out things to him. Like, you do know they're going to contact Kirk to confirm this order. And it's like, yeah, I'm counting on that. And then Tyrell eventually sacrifices himself, to save, to avoid carrying out the order to kill Kirk. So you get this effective struggle with him, and also the thing falls out of Chekhov's ear and they shoot it with a phaser. And which I think I read Gene Roddenberry had a big problem with that because we should understand other life forms, but not this one. And I may be misremembering that, so don't count that as true. But, Chekhov has this line where he's talking about after he makes contact with the Enterprise crew again, he's saying, they put creatures in our bodies. And this is just a personal thing. But so in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where I grew up, one of the local businesses was called the Ozark Mountain Smokehouse. And it was a small family-owned chain that sold smoked meats, smoked cheeses, things like that. And I had a friend in high school who worked there. And so one of his jobs would be to slice the smoked meat and everything. And it was kind of, crumbly and weird looking and stuff. And so for one reason or another in my circle of friends, the line became an established running joke. They put smoked meat in our bodies.
Okay.
I know that's totally irrelevant, but it's part of my history, and I think of it whenever I see this movie.
It's a good line. They put. I would like to put some smoked meat in, but that's a whole nother thing. So let's. As the movie opens, we have this great James Horner soundtrack, which I want to point out. It's a great soundtrack. Really, it creates a lot of music for modern Trek comes out of this soundtrack. Let's put it that way. The Alexander Courage music from the original series sticks around, but a lot of the modern Trek music from series from Next Gen and on, and the movies really builds off of this. And so we come up and we have the viewer, first time watcher of this movie is kind of shocked. We have this initial shock. It's not Kirk in the chair. It's Saavik. It's this.
Who is that?
So this Vulcan woman of some sort.
Yeah. And we learn in the novel she's half Vulcan, half Romulan, but they don't ever say that on screen.
Right. Exactly. And we have this scene where we see all of our beloved cast members, our beloved characters, our crew, die. McCoy and Chekhov and Uhura all die, and I kind of felt like, and Spock, right? And I kind of felt like this was a nod to to kind of circumvent the rumors that there had been rumors that people are going to die in this one. Our crew is going to die in this one. Among the fans ahead of the movie, and so this kind of dispels or kind of lulls you into a false sense of, oh, that's what they're really referring to. Yep. Well, kind of a nod at that.
That, and also, I remember reading in a book where Nicholas Myers, I believe, talked about the reason that he put this at the beginning of the film, and because people knew that Spock was going to die in this, and he didn't want the audience fixating on that fact, just waiting for it to happen the whole movie and not getting into the story. And so his way of defusing that was to visually kill Spock off right at the beginning. So people think this is it. And then they bring Spock back and they can kind of forget about it for the rest of the movie and get into the story until it happens for reals.
Well, and it also allowed them to establish the banter. Because again, we were talking about how they wanted to make this much more character centric and not, science fiction-y, special effects centric. And so they could immediately start with the banter of Kirk walking in. Physician, heal thyself,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and aren't you dead?
Yeah.
I like that one.
Yeah.
And so we have the establishment of a pop culture reference that persists to this day.
Yeah.
Of the no-win situation is a Kobayashi Maru, which is the name of a freighter. It's a Japanese ship name. Really, it's something Maru is a Japanese ship name. And so we have this scenario that is presented that apparently to command track cadets have to go through this test or simulation where they're told they need to rescue this ship, and there's no way to do it. There's no way to beat the simulation, no way to win. And it's how we react to the no-win situation is, an important test of character and integrity and leadership ability, which is an interesting idea. Mm-hmm. And Kirk eventually says, I don't believe that there's such a thing as a no-win scenario. Is he right? Is it arrogance? Is it the power of positive thinking? So it's...
So that's what we're going to get on a larger scale in this story is for Kirk, a no-win scenario.
Right. I do like the fact that after the simulation is done, and Admiral Kirk comes in, she says, any suggestions, Admiral? And Kirk says, prayers, Mr. Saavik. The Klingons don't take prisoners. That was a great line. It's one of my favorites.
By the way, a little bit on Japanese ship naming conventions. Maru, the word literally means circle, and it has a variety of suggested reasons why it's used for ships. The ship is kind of a little closed world or closed circle in itself. They built defensive circles around castles, and the ship kind of defends people. Also, it returns to port, and so it's sometimes seen as a reference to a wish for the ship to return. And it is it's historically been given to civilian ships, not military ships. So that's why this is a civilian freighter. And Kobayashi is both a family name in Japan, but it also means small forest. And so this is the small forest circle is the name of the ship. And it's not dissimilar to other ones. Like, for example, when we did a big nuclear test in the Pacific back in the 50s, some of the fallout fell on a ship called the Lucky Dragon 7. And that became the basis of the movie Godzilla. But if you, in Japanese, Lucky Dragon 6 or Lucky Dragon 7 is something or other Maru, because it was a civilian fishing ship.
Huh.
Okay. Interesting. So we have this simulation. We have Saavik. Saavik is an interesting character because this is really the introduction of Kirstie Alley as an actress. This is her first major role.
Right.
And she was very popular with the fans. She doesn't come back in Star Trek 3. Robin Curtis replaces her in the role, and she goes on to be in Cheers and do some other things she was well known for. But she plays this character very interestingly. She's some sort of protege for Spock. Some people thought she might be a love interest of some sort, but I don't think that bears out.
I really felt it was just because of fellow Vulcan.
Yeah,
right. Like kind of like a master Vulcan to a junior Vulcan.
And even though she has the Vulcan reserve, she also it shows some emotion in this. In fact, at Spock's funeral, spoilers, at Spock's funeral, sorry, a 35-year-old spoiler, she cries. And some fans were kind of taken aback, but it's showing, I think, her half Romulan side.
Yeah. Also, she is hot in this movie.
Right. Yes, I was, it was 1982. Yes, I was about 14 or 15 years old. Yes, Kirstie Alley was the very interesting young woman in this movie, which was an interesting casting idea. I mean, all of the other actresses are much older, and so you bring in your young male audience with a pretty girl.
Yeah, and I like the second way she wears her hair, and it's still regulation.
Still regulation. That's right. So actually, we should talk about, speaking of the way we're dressed, the difference from the first movie. The ship is pretty much the same, but they've started introducing this idea of we change the uniform every time we have a new movie. And we have these new, more military uniforms. The motion picture uniforms were the hated pajamas, the jumpsuits. And these are much more military cut looking uniforms.
They're textured. They're not just skin tights like the pajamas were. These are very textured. They have frills different kinds of textures that add dimension to them. They have this very bold kind of red color. And this is also the origin of the flip between gold and red, indicating the command track. Because in the original series, it was the gold, or actually in real life green, but they came across on camera as gold. The gold shirts were the command officers, and the red shirts were the engineering and security officers. Right. Well, here, everybody's in red, except on certain occasions we have engineers and medical professionals in white, which I thought was an interesting tie-in to how Discovery has medicals in white. But then people's sub-department, given that they're normally wearing a red top, their sub-department is indicated by the color of their collar. And so you have McCoy wearing a bluish-green collar to signify he's in the life sciences department. And then eventually, going forward, through the series of movies, red would become so associated with Captain Kirk in command that they flipped when Next Generation came on. They flipped the color scheme so that command officers wear red and engineering and security officers now wear gold.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's interesting. And then the cadets have a red collar, they're double breasted. These outer jackets.
Yeah.
They have this interesting way that Kirk opens it up, and if the corner flops down. I mean, I'm not big into fashion, but I just find it's an interesting, different look that you can create. That in the tense situation where Kirk's he needs a little more air, and he unbuckles the thing, and it flops down, and he's now a little in a more relaxed situation.
Revealing a white interior that can then get stained with blood for added drama.
Yep, exactly.
Exactly, with the Mr. Preston's bloody handprint. And they have these away team jackets that they wear, which Kirk wears his collar flipped up because,
he's
preppy.
Kirk.
He's Kirk. So I thought I'd mention these uniforms, which we'll see actually once in the Next Gen when we have Frasier show up in an episode of the Next Generation.
We see him a couple of times. There's a couple episodes in Next Gen where they have them.
Sometimes they mess it up and they don't have them wearing the under sweater and that sort of thing. But in general, that sort of symbolizes this era of Star Trek. It's become very identified with it.
Another aspect of the visual design that gets established, it's a much smaller element, but we have our first introduction of Romulan Ale, which is blue. It's blue Kool-Aid, basically, but it's illegal, which we later find out is not for health reasons. It's not like super addictive or super disabling to drink this stuff. It's just for trade reasons.
It's like the
like
Cuban embargo.
Cuban cigars.
Yeah, it's like, I was just going to say, it's like Havana cigars. But we get the Romulan Ale that comes back, and I love how there's just this Starfleet underground of Romulan Ale drinkers, even though it's technically illegal, just like there is an underground of Havana cigar smokers in the military, even though those are technically, or were technically illegal. I'm not sure if they still are.
Yeah, there is a line that from McCoy where I think it might get lost if you're not aware of the timeline of things. But as he presents it to Kirk, he says, Kirk says, 2283, huh? And McCoy says, it has to age a while. The year in this movie is 2283. It's brand new in the bottle. It doesn't age. So the other thing we talk about is that this Spock is now captain of the Enterprise. Kirk is still an admiral from the motion picture. Spock is captain of the Enterprise, which is now a training vessel. So there's some period of time. How long after the events of the motion picture are we? Since at that time she was newly refurbished. So we're just maybe a couple of years later.
I think it's more than that. I think they've completed a 5-year mission.
A second 5-year mission.
And we're after that. I'd have to check the timeline, but
because the problem with the timeline is that the motion picture occurs 18 months after the end of the first 5-year mission. So that was in our time, 1979, but it would have been about 1973 their time. And then we're 1982. Kirk should not be old yet if it were just after that the motion picture. A period of time has to have occurred. And I think it's generally understood. I don't know if it's canon or not, but it's generally understood that there's a whole nother set of another 5-year mission that took place in between.
So it looks like the events of the motion picture are set in 2273. And this is, it says, actually, according to the timeline I'm looking at, it says Wrath of Khan is set in 2285. So that would mean the Romulan Ale is a couple of years old. But it looks like 12 years after the motion picture.
Okay. So that will then give us a Kirk of this age, of William Shatner's age at this point. It kind of makes up for the time.
It's interesting that even though Spock is the captain now, he's never taken the Kobayashi Maru test. I guess maybe they thought it wasn't necessary since he's a Vulcan or something.
Although Saavik has to take it.
No, that's true. Yeah. But if she's half Romulan, then she's got a more emotional side or something. Or, okay, it's just a slip in the writing, but they said
plot reasons, that's why.
Well, the other thing is the other cadets now know the trick, so they can't ever take the test. The other cadets who were on the bridge at the time.
Yeah.
So we have this theme. Kirk says at this point, how we deal with death is at least as important as how we deal with life. And that's, this is a foreshadowing.
Yep.
And
message coming in, sir.
It also has to do. It's not just with Spock dying, but it has to do with a little bit with Kirk getting older. He's getting older. He's dealing with existential questions of what it means to get older. Spock gives him a birthday gift of A Tale of Two Cities. Which has there was the best of times and the worst of times, and were you trying to tell me something, Spock? And nothing more than just that birthdays apparently are the best of times, aren't they? Yeah. So there's this aging thing going on.
Yeah, so the fact it's Kirk's birthday sets us up for him contemplating aging and the conversation he has with Spock, and then with McCoy, where McCoy brings him as a birthday present a pair of reading glasses because he's allergic to Retinax. And I thought, how does McCoy know what his eyeglasses prescription is? And I thought, oh, duh, medical officers. He's got access to his file.
Exactly.
Right. Well, speaking of which, these are my new glasses I'm wearing today. I just got them today.
Nice.
So
cool.
That's a little serendipity, a coincidence there. So I like the view of Kirk's apartment. We get to see Kirk's apartment home. He is apparently, his home decorating is models of sailing ships, flintlock pistols, walking sticks, and armor. Those are the key elements of his home decorating. And I like how they're trying to convey something about him that way.
This is basically what they found in King Tut's tomb, except it was bows and arrows instead of flintlock pistols.
Well, they also had a classic, an ancient computer, which actually at the time the movie was filmed was an older computer. It was a Commodore PET 2001, which would have been about 3-4 years old. But of course, the interesting part is at the same time this movie was coming out, William Shatner was advertising the Commodore VIC-20 in commercials.
Wow. Yeah. So that really kind of, for some of us, that really sets this movie in a period in time. There's a fun line here where McCoy is kind of needling him about, you need to get your command back, get back out there before you really become old and part of this collection of antiques.
Right.
And Kirk says, don't mince words, Bones. What do you really think? and McCoy has that look at his face like, what? I'm not mincing words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really love that line, and it's the first time I encountered that, and I've subsequently encountered it a lot. Sometimes if I'm really frank about something, people will say, don't mince words, Jimmy. Tell us what you really think.
Yep.
And I wonder, what did Nicholas Meyer create that line for this movie, or does it have a longer history? And he just used it. And I don't know the answer to that question.
I have a feeling that seems like one of those phrases that's been around for a while, someone would say, don't hold back, don't mince words, don't, tell us what you really think. I have a feeling that probably has a fairly long lineage.
I'm sure there was something equivalent to it, but the mince words,
right.
I wonder if that form of it was something Nick Myers came up with, but I don't know.
Right.
I'd have to research it.
So we then shift to the beginning of the plot for this movie, the plot device, which is the USS Reliant, which this ship, I'm a ship geek. This ship model becomes very important in all of Star Trek into the future. They reuse the Reliant over and over again in Next Gen and in the movies. It becomes a very important part of Trek history, technology and history. And so we have the Reliant, and we have Captain Terrell, who would later on Next Generation play Dathon.
Dharma Jalad at Tanagra.
Exactly. And so he's a key to a future role there, a very important role there. And we have his first officer, Pavel Chekhov, who has moved on.
And
glad to see someone has moved on in their career.
Exactly. This is great because this is what happens in the military. You do not spend your whole career on one ship with the same rank. And so it's really great to see Chekhov has been promoted, and he's now the first officer of a completely different ship.
Along with, by the way, Mr. Kyle, Commander Kyle,
who's now
communications officer. Yes, he was previously the transporter tech on the Enterprise, so good to see him there. They're on this mission that they're looking for a lifeless planet for the Genesis project. So Starfleet is working with these scientists to find a planet on which to conduct this test.
Yeah, and it's like, this is one of those things you can't think about much because there are tons and tons of lifeless planets. And even like the planet they end up using, Regula 1, right under the Regula 1 Space Lab, it's a lifeless planet. And in the Genesis briefing file, they say, we anticipate doing this on a lifeless moon or something. Well, then why do you need this big survey that's going to take 6 months?
I think the idea was that they needed to find it with very particular conditions. a planet in a particular orbit with a particular kind of sun, with a particular kind of conditions, which is why they later on, why the Genesis planet in Star Trek 3 is unstable.
No,
is
that was
because
because of proto-matter.
Was it because of the proto-matter?
Yeah. It was because David cut corners in the science.
That's right. Yeah, now that you mention it.
Yeah, the initial explanation was because they were worried about existing life, but that later come out that something worse going on.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, you're right. If I always thought of it as there need to be a particular kind of planet and a particular kind of system, that sort of thing, and kind of thought of it that way.
Well, and that's reasonable headcanon, and they could have said that on screen. They just didn't.
Right. So it's the Genesis project. Let's talk about that. The word Genesis, it's obviously a biblical allusion to the book of Genesis, where we're creating, where God creates everything from nothing. And they kind of fudge it a little bit. It's life from lifelessness. So not from nothing.
That's their gloss on it. The word in Greek, Genesis, means beginning. So. Right.
And there's a clear concern on the part of the scientists. They know this could be used as a weapon. I mean, you think about it, and this kind of connects to something that was topical at the time in the news, which was the idea of neutron bombs. Now, with an atomic bomb or a nuclear bomb, you drop it, it wipes everything out, it irradiates everything is destroyed, including the people, but also the buildings and whatever. And the neutron bomb was this new idea where, what if we dropped a bomb that only killed the people, but left the buildings and the infrastructure and everything in place for us to move in and take over? People were horrified by this, justifiably. I mean, this is
we want
horrific.
The buildings destroyed too, not just the people.
Well, right. But you're right. It sort of brought home the horrors of nuclear war, these weapons of mass destruction. But so the Genesis weapon was a sort of analog to the neutron bomb, where you kill all the people on a planet, and when you're done, you have a fresh new planet to work with.
Yeah.
You can imagine if the Klingons had gotten a hold of this, it would have been a bad thing.
Which they then try to do in the very next movie. And
Exactly.
I like how the fact that just right off the bat, before we even know what Genesis is, David Marcus is saying, this could be used as a weapon. And we have this whole Cold War theme of, scientists being manipulated by the military, which is something that, really, I mean, that had been playing out in real life since World War II.
Right.
With the Manhattan Project. And so it really played into the Cold War themes of the time, which were still going on in the 80s when the Cold War was really tense.
Yes. And so it really, I think another reason why this kind of came home to people, because it was these weapons of mass destruction sort of ideas. And so Tyrell and Chekhov beam down to this planet, Ceti Alpha 6.
They think it's Ceti Alpha 6.
Right. And because it might be a suitable planet, but they got a blip on one dyno scanner, and they have to go check it out, see if it's something that can be transplanted or something. Here's the problem. So Kirk dropped Khan and his people off on Ceti Alpha 5, and along comes Reliant, and they think that this planet, which is Ceti Alpha 5, they think it's Ceti Alpha 6 because Ceti Alpha 6 exploded and knocked Ceti Alpha 5 into Ceti Alpha 6's orbit.
Yeah.
Why would you think this is Ceti Alpha 6 if there's only 5 planets? If a planet exploded...
Where's the huge asteroid belt that would have resulted from that? And why isn't the asteroid belt in the same orbit as Ceti Alpha 6?
Exactly. This is the problem. And... why are there? I mean, are there no records in the computer to say, by the way, warning, megalomaniac is on this planet along with his people?
Yeah. Do not approach Ceti Alpha 5. Might be a good idea. Just don't even go near the solar system.
Yeah.
Right.
And any time they're coming into a solar system, there should be some kind of pre-mission briefing, and they apparently haven't had one. They just sailed in here. Didn't check any records and didn't count the planets and didn't look for an asteroid belt, and none of this bears thinking about.
Right. This is one of those things we have to suspend so we can get to the good story. Also, fans have all had lots of anguish over the fact that in the original episode with Khan, Space Seed, first season, Chekhov did not show up in Star Trek till the second season. So how could Khan recognize him? Well, obviously, Chekhov was on the ship. He just wasn't on the bridge yet.
Right. And that's the obvious explanation. I don't think they need to give us one. Walter Koenig has talked about how I knew when we were filming this scene that I wasn't on during that episode, but I kept my mouth shut.
There is a great quote from him, though, that he says that the reason why Khan knows him is because Chekhov, who was kind of an underling, kept Khan from the bathroom for too long. And that's why he knows who he was.
Yeah, he kept him out of the bathroom while he was guarding him or something. So that I remember you, Mr. Chekhov. So they find, Chekhov recognizes the name of the ship from seatbelts.
Botany Bay. We've got to get out of here.
Yep.
Oh man, Walter Koenig delivers some great lines as Chekhov. Just so memorable the way he does it. This and Star Trek IV, the nuclear vessels.
Yeah. But by the way, another thing that we can't really think about much is, so if you have this colony of 20-something people here on this planet, they've got to be eating something. You can't have a colony of 20 people and not have a functioning biosphere that's supporting them. I can only guess it's maybe underground or something. And they say that the mind control creature is the last surviving life form on the planet. Well, that can't be literally true unless they're eating those things exclusively, in which case, what are those things eating?
Yeah,
right. And so I'm assuming they mean animal life form. There's got to be plants or fungus or something that the humans can eat. But if there's an ecosystem on this planet, even if it's been damaged, they should be picking that up from space.
Right. And maybe they had hydroponics in one of the cargo containers or something, but yeah, you're right. Something's got to be making the oxygen they're breathing. So one of the other things people asked about, they've been on this planet for 15 years. Why do all of Khan's followers look like they would have been 12 when they were stranded?
They have extra long lifespans or something. Yeah. They're genetically engineered.
Except Khan. Khan looks like he's the right age.
Yeah.
Yes, he does. But man, we'll probably get into this when we talk about Space Seed. About the name Botany Bay comes from a penal colony that was in Australia back in the days when people were transported from Britain to Australia as prisoners.
Which is what happens when Khan and his group leave Earth. They're basically criminals going into exile. Exactly. Going into transportation to keep them away from Earth.
So I found it interesting that Khan keeps these SETI eels that give you mind control powers as pets. Did he use them on his own people or something? Like, what was he anticipating someone would show up that he could use it on?
I know. Why are they keeping it? I mean, maybe it's just a pet to them.
Could be.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a research project for them or something.
Because every supervillain needs to have some sort of scary pet, like
like a cat.
Yeah. Or dark people with sharks with laser beams on their heads. So then we switch back to Kirk. He arrives at Enterprise. He's going to do an inspection.
By the way, I not only love the way Chekhov does the Botany Bay line, I love the way as soon as Tyrell says, "I've never even met Admiral Kirk," and Khan is Admiral.
Really?
He says it like 4 times. He's just so taken with the idea he's an admiral now.
Well, and he's so self-centered that he's like, "Oh, they promoted him for what he did to me." As if, like, the only reason that Kirk exists is because of Khan. And I thought that was effective writing.
Yeah, and he's very self-centered. It's like, you never told the story to amuse your captain. He can't believe Chekhov hasn't just been telling the legend of his encounter with Khan.
Right. So we have this, and of course, you mentioned the eels being shoved into their ears. They actually made these big, models of both Walter Koenig and Paul Winfield of their ears that they had where the thing slid in. So back in the day, it looked effective. Back in the day, it looked more effective than now. It looks fake. So Kirk arrives on board. He comes through the boarding port where the torpedo bay is for inspection, and he encounters Scotty, and he says, "Mr. Scott, you old space dog, you're well."
Yeah.
This and Sky's had a wee bout of shore leave, and this is actually a reference to James Doohan, who actually had a heart attack before this, and had recovered afterward. And so this was a little inside joke about good to see you, Jimmy Doohan, back on the stage. So
but the implication in universe is he got drunk.
Yes.
Yep.
Well, it is Scotty.
Yeah.
We still have that Tribble incident, the bar fight with the Klingons.
Yeah.
So we have this engineering cadet that Kirk stops and talks to, Peter Preston, who we foreshadowing again. In the novelization, Peter Preston was Scotty's nephew, which is why, and I think in versions of the script, which is why Scotty looks kind of proud of him and is very interested in what's going on with him, and why later on Scotty carries him to the bridge after being injured, as opposed to all the others are injured. So there's a relationship here.
Yeah, and they filmed those scenes too, but they didn't include them in the theatrical cut, but they were restored in some later editions.
Yeah, I'd like to. Yeah, I don't think I've seen that one.
Yeah, because there is a director's cut you can rent from Amazon or buy from Amazon.
Oh, okay.
So we also get when Kirk is walking around, Saavik. We have this moment between Saavik and Spock where they're talking in Vulcan. And this is the first time we get a sustained conversation. And it's not long, but it's a sustained conversation in Vulcan. And unlike Star Trek The Motion Picture, where they created Klingon as a real language for this and published it, and it made lots of money, it's like, oh, well, that can only happen once. We can't do Vulcan. And so they didn't let him do Vulcan. But the linguist in me just can't help listening to what they're saying and analyzing it. Spock is, Saavik says basically Kirk kind of surprises me, and Spock's like, well, what about him? He's so human. And Spock says, nobody's perfect, Saavik. But the way he says her name is Saavikam. And it's like, ooh, Vulcan has vocative markers to indicate you've got a little post position there, the at the end of Saavik. That's like our equivalent in English of "oh," like "oh, Joshua, what are you doing?" Or in Arabic, "ya." So it's like, okay, Vulcan has post-positive vocative markers. That is awesome.
So the Klingon in this was created. I mean, the Vulcan in this was created by the same guy who in Star Trek 3 would create Klingon language, Mark Okrand.
Yeah,
and he actually dubbed in the Vulcan dialogue here apparently for Spock, since the actors had already been filmed talking in English. I think
he wrote the dialogue to fit their lips. The pattern of their lips were making in English, and then they had the actors do the dubbing, I believe.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so he did the Klingon in Star Trek 3, 5, 6, and he even did some Romulan and Vulcan for the J.J. Abrams Star Trek film in 2009. That was in that movie. So he is the
Star Trek language guy.
The Star Trek language guy. He's probably among the foremost of what is there's a word for the made up languages people. I forget what they call it.
Constructed languages.
Thank you. Constructed. I mean, he's really kind of considered among the foremost after Tolkien, of course. So that was interesting. So we have this moment where they're going to take the Enterprise out, and Spock in the center chair turns and asks Saavik to take the ship out and take the con as they take the Enterprise out of space dock. And Kirk has this sort of stricken look in his face, and McCoy offers him a tranquilizer. And I've never really understood what this was about.
It's a reference. It's a callback to an earlier line where they're coming over in the shuttle. Kirk tells Sulu he's glad that Sulu's going to be at the helm for 3 weeks on their training mission, because he doesn't think these kids can steer, meaning the new cadets. And so then when Spock says to Kirstie Alley, have you ever taken a ship out of dock before? And she says, no, that's what makes Kirk nervous.
Although it's still Sulu at the helm.
I know. It's one of the
he's
things
not going to fly it into something.
We can't think about, yeah.
So I don't think Sulu would ever take a command from the fresh out of the academy lieutenant and fly something into something. Yeah, I have to wonder, is there some, now that I think about it, is there some inspiration in Saavik for Michael Burnham in
interesting.
In Maybe. Discovery?
Maybe.
It'd be something interesting to think about. And if we think about Spock, if now what we know about Michael Burnham being his foster sister, if we want to create some of this idea of this connection, maybe Spock sees in Saavik a little bit of what he saw in his sister Michael.
And also later Lieutenant Valeris.
Mm-hmm.
Right, which we could talk about that in Star Trek 6, where that was supposed to be Saavik and they got changed at a late date.
Mm-hmm.
So interesting. So we have this moment where Spock says to Kirk, commanding a starship is your first best destiny. Anything else is a waste of material. You know, he's really telling Kirk that you really, like, just like McCoy was, you need to get back in the center chair. This is what becoming admiral and sitting behind a desk was a bad idea. And then we have this. We've got this message from the regular one.
Oh, we also
scientist.
have, in that conversation, we also have the first discussion of the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one. And in this case, it's Spock is telling Kirk, if we're going to go into the field, this is not just a training mission anymore. The senior officer, you need to be in command because the needs of the whole crew outweigh my needs.
Yep.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was going to mention. Was the reason that that he says that line is because they've gotten a message from Carol Marcus that someone is coming to take Genesis. This was Khan's ploy to get Kirk to Regular One so we could attack him. And it's interesting to contrast Spock's response to Decker's response from the motion picture. Decker was the captain displaced out of the center chair, and he resented Kirk for it. That he had to make way for him. And so we have this very interesting different take from Spock. No, this is your seat.
You're proceeding from a false assumption. I have no ego to bruise.
Yeah. Well, of course, talk about plot holes. How did Khan know that Kirk would be the one come running when the call was made? Because, of course, he's an admiral. All he has to do is pick up the phone, quote unquote, the communications device and say, send a starship to check this out.
But as usual, the Enterprise is the only one in the sector, so it has to be the one to go.
Right. There's either 8,000 ships in Starfleet, as we learned in Discovery, or there's 2.
Yep. By the way,
one or the other.
It's nice to see Spock's quarters. He has this 1970s disco mirror kind of thing with receding lights there, I guess.
I saw that.
To reflect on. And he's got an animal skull that looks like it has really long teeth, and I'm wondering, is that a Salat skull?
Could be.
Maybe that's his pet.
Maybe it's his pet.
Although that would seem to be an emotional decision to keep the skull, and not logical to hang on to it. But
yeah,
we'll see.
By the way, so with the thing that gets Kirk involved is they have this phone call. Although they do this twice in the show. They call this compic. Get on the compic and talk to Dr. Marcus. And it's like, guys, come on, you can do better than that. Call Dr. Marcus or something like that. But they get this compic from Dr. Marcus, and it's all staticky, and then it gets cuts off, and Uhura tells Kirk it's been jammed at the source. So that should tell them something really bad is happening, and they should have their guard up more than they do when they go there. Right.
So Kirk is trying to figure out what to do, and he says to McCoy and Spock, why would someone be going after Genesis? And McCoy wants to know, what's Genesis? And so they have this grant video. Basically, it's a Kickstarter video for the Genesis project, which when you look back at the time, I mean, it looks rudimentary. Mm-hmm. The CGI of this video was considered groundbreaking at the time. And in fact, I remember seeing something about the rendering of this video took weeks at ILM.
Well, and it was the first major computer-generated 3D scene in any major motion picture at all.
Right.
That had there had been computers like graphics, we'd seen in other, the previous Star Trek, and then Star Wars had some computer graphics. But to have this fully rendered 3D scene like that was, again, it was groundbreaking. That was the beginning of the 3D rendering movement.
And because it's presented as a computer simulation, it's okay that it doesn't look real.
Right. Yep. I also like that the retina scan as security, which again, this is very, I don't think I'd ever seen this before. Like the idea of scanning your retina as a fingerprint. It is a much longer process than even today, which I look at my phone, I have Face ID on my phone, and it's fairly instantaneous. Mm-hmm. I kind of, it's just amazing to see how far even our vision of the future has come from that time.
I'm just glad we don't have to press our retinas on an ink pad and roll them on a piece of paper.
That would be painful, yes, and messy.
Yeah.
Hey, I got a question, guys. So we've been going for about an hour now, and we are not close to done. You want to make this a two-parter?
Yeah,
Okay.
we could
do
split
that.
it here, and we'll make this into a 2-part episode of Secrets of Star Trek, because we do want to do this movie justice. So let us know, what do you think so far of what we're talking about with Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan? You can always contact us by going to sqpn.com/trek or the SQPN Facebook page and leave us feedback there, or you can send us an email to trek@sqpn.com. And like Jimmy said, we'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the second part of our discussion of the Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan.
Star Trek Part 2, Part 2.
We've been doing a lot of Part 1s and 2s of things lately. Until then, Jimmy Aiken, thank you for joining me and sharing these secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, and live long and prosper.
Father Corey Stika, thank you as well.
Well, thank you, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, the old Klingon proverb that tells us revenge is a dish that is best served cold. It is very cold in space.